Your friend Sandy Oliver? Goody. All right. Sandy and I got to know each other. You figured it out, Sandy, about 15 years ago, right? Something like that. And the ride, by the way, from the mainland to Islesboro is just beautiful. It's just absolutely wonderful. So anyway, got to know Sandy, who runs a place called Pretty Good Farm. And it is, I would say it's a very good farm, but it's her farm, so I let her name it. So anyway, Sandy is a gardener, a cook, and a freelance food writer and food historian with a weekly column in the Bangor Daily News, and is a regular columnist in the pages of the Working Waterfront. I have to tell you about this particular picture. That was one of the first times I met Sandy. The woman on the right is one of my Spanish graduate students, Silvia. And I had made a bunt cake to bring along to Sandy. It was a very good bunt cake, but when I tried to get it out of the bloody pan, it just split apart like this. I didn't have time to make a new one, so I just took it along, and you see Sandy really minded. You can tell by the picture, right? So anyway, she is a regular columnist in the pages of Working Waterfront, published by the Island Institute, which I get every month. And hers is the first column I always read. And she writes for other Maine publications, such as the Bangor Daily News. She's authored several books of food history, including the prize-winning Saltwater Foodways, New Englanders and Their Food in the 19th Century. And that's a great big book. I have it upstairs. Food in Colonial and Federal America. And she co-authored Giving Thanks, Thanksgiving History from Pilgrim to Pumpkin Pie. And that one I do have. Her cookbook, Maine Home Cooking, here you are, which I'm very glad I bought when I did because it went out of print. Anyway, her cookbook, Maine Home Cooking, was published by Down East Books. She lives on Islesboro, where she raises vegetables for market on Pretty Good Farm. And it is, as I said, it's a very good farm. So that's Sandy, and I hope you enjoy her as much as I do. And I'll talk to you later.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you very much. Yeah, Nina and I have had all kinds of adventures. The topless cake is one. Going off to Providence for a food conference on the history of the Atlantic, something or another at Brown. That was another adventure. We've had some awfully good times. And I've visited her over in Friendship, which is lots of fun. I just love going there. They have a house that sits so close to the water that it laps against. You can sit right on their porch and the water's going lap, lap, lap. Oh, it's like a little piece of heaven over there. And I got an awfully good recipe from Nina. Nina, did you already mention the key lime pie? Yeah, okay. And I put it's in Maine Home Cooking. So this is here's Nina right here. In Maine Home Cooking. It's a wonderful recipe for key lime pie, my favorite. So my job today is to tell you about how Maine Home Cooking came about. And I first I should start with the column in the Bangor Daily News that Maine Home Cooking rests upon. I did a little, I always forget, people say, how long have you been doing that? I think, well, it feels like forever sometimes. But in actuality, it began in April of 2005. And it came about because of a telephone call from Letitia Baldwin, who worked at the Bangor Daily News at that time. And she called me up and said, we used to have a column in the paper. It was written by this woman named Brownie Shrump, and we just, she quit doing it a few years ago, and we just haven't done it again, but we think we'd like to. The premise of the column was that readers would inquire. They would write in. They said, "Do you have a really good recipe for apple upside down cake or something like that. And then I would put in the column, I would say, so-and-so from, Machias would like a recipe for apple upside down cake. Does anyone have one? And lots of times it would be a recipe where someone would say, my grandmother used to make this really good brown bread that had, breadcrumbs in it or something like that. And then I would write this all out. People would send me their recipes. I would sort through them, give a couple of them a try in my own kitchen. And if I thought it tasted pretty good, I'd write it up and put it in the paper, and on we'd go. So to get started on that, I just asked a couple of my neighbors if they had a recipe for something that they would like to make. And somebody said to me, oh yeah, I need a recipe for chicken cacciatore. So I said, okay, and because I didn't have a column in the paper yet, I asked another friend if she had a recipe for chicken cacciatore, and she said yes. And so I wrote it up, put it in the paper, and we were off and running. And that went along pretty well for about a month and a half. And then all of a sudden came the week when I didn't have an inquiry from anybody. Nobody had written in to say, do you have a good recipe for brownies or something? And I was saying, oh, what I do now. And I called up Letitia and I said, what do I do? What do I do? And she said, calm down. She said, just tell them about whatever's happening in your kitchen. And I thought, oh, okay, I could do that. So as time went on, whatever was happening in my kitchen began to depend more and more on what was happening in my garden. And when it wasn't actively growing in the garden, it was down in the cellar or on the shelves after having been canned or pickled or whatever. And so I'd be writing about whatever it is I found when I went down there and pulled out and said, I better use up these apples pretty quick because, they're getting big, soft, squishy spots on them. And so that's how it just kept on going. The problem with doing a column like this is that it turns the writer into something of a predator, actually. If you go, when somebody like me goes to a potluck supper, I try something from absolutely every dish. If I find a couple of things I really like, I come after the person who brought it. Say, can I have the recipe? Can I put it in the paper? And, they're often flattered, and they should be, because I wouldn't put something in the paper that I didn't like. But I hate to admit that the motivation is often desperation. I need something for the paper in a couple of weeks, and this looks like a good one. So it can make a person like that kind of. I remember Aline White. I forget what paper she used to write for. She's related to. I think she was married, or perhaps she. I'm not going to put her in the past tense just yet. I haven't spoken with her in a long time. But Aline told me, she said, you don't know how fast a week can go unless you have a weekly column. And that certainly has proved to be true. My mother always said the older you get, the faster time goes. And that's true too, but you add a weekly column to that, and you can absolutely hear time whistling by your ears. It's just amazing how fast it goes. So I've been doing this now, since 2005. Even though I first accepted this assignment because I like being employed, and they actually would pay me every week. But it didn't take very long before I had a kind of a mission to my effort. One thing, I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, oh, nobody cooks anymore. And I've had enough discussions with people to find out that people, in fact, do cook. They just don't think they're cooking. Cooking has been a little bit redefined in our times. But I kind of took it on as a mission to encourage people to get back in their kitchens again. I wanted to wean people away from using prepared food as an ingredient all the time. You know, the person who makes a quiche by buying a pre-made crust and a pre-made quiche mix custardy thing, and opens a package of spinach, wrings it out, dumps it in the thing, and then pours cream on top and some cheese and out of a package already shredded, you know, and puts it in the oven. I try really hard to have recipes that you use from scratch, which is not to say that I'm going to always be snooty about this stuff, because I've eaten some wonderful things that people have made from, you know, pre-mixed stuff. And, you know, you can get yourself in an embarrassing corner sometimes by being a little too snobby about that. But I do try to encourage people to cook from scratch as much as they can. And the other thing that I wanted to do was to help people stick to a strongly seasonal diet as much as I could. Or, you know, you're looking around for what's ready right now when it's going to taste its very best. For example, I walk into a grocery store in September and they've got all this winter squash spread around. Well, you know, in Maine, it's really another whole month before anybody's going to harvest winter squashes if they're growing them themselves. Around my house, September looks a lot like a Mediterranean diet, because that's when I have ripe tomatoes, ripe cucumbers, ripe eggplants and ripe peppers and things like that. So that, you know, it's a little, I think the grocery stores are being a little previous, frankly. But I do more tomato canning in September than I do in August. You know, if I'm lucky in August, cool evenings on this island where, you know, the tomatoes, unless they're protected, kind of shiver overnight. You know, I'm lucky to get some slicers to put in a bacon, you know, in a BLT or to put on a salad. So seasonality means something a little bit different to me than it does to the grocery store. I like to observe holidays, and you can tell it's a holiday by when you go into a grocery store, you see whatever the display at the end of the aisle is. So, you know, when you walk in just before the end of January and you start seeing stuff that celebrates football, you know that Super Bowl is coming. And, you know, Super Bowl is actually sort of a national food holiday. That's when all the kits come out for the 3-alarm chili and stuff like that. So we always have an hors d'oeuvre or snacky kind of thing in the paper for Super Bowl. And, you know, all of December is dedicated to cookies or homemade confections or things that you can serve as an appetizer at your holiday parties, whether Christmas or New Year's or any other thing that comes up in December. So holidays, and lately I've taken an interest in addressing ways to work around food shortages. When you go into a store and you see an empty shelf, you know, what can you use if you can't buy what you're used to buying? Just this past week, I talked about keeping dried beans on hand, and I gave a couple of ways of soaking them quickly or using them or preparing them so that they're pre-made for your own cooking, because the canned bean shells can be a little sparse right about now. I'm also working on things that you can use in place of cream cheese, because apparently sometime last fall, hackers got into the major cream cheese producer in America, and now there's cream cheese shortages. You know, how does this happen? And also, I'm terribly interested in Maine as a micro region. You know, what wonderful things still cling on here in Maine that are fun to describe and provide recipes for. Very often, the memories that come along from people saying, "Oh, I remember we always had this at Thanksgiving," and you know, it's really fun to talk about all that kind of stuff. And there, you know, in the column, over the roughly 17 years that I've done it now, I've had some really wonderful moments. When we first started putting this in the paper, I would get these charming letters from women who had cooked all their lives and they were sending me recipes. And I could always tell it was a Taste Buds reader. I'd go to the mailbox and I'd pull out a little envelope, and it was usually, pretty little. And it had a return address thing up in the corner that had little flowers on it and the person's name. And I'd open it up and it'd be note paper with a cat or a dog or pansies or something. And then the recipe written out, and the writer would say, "Oh, I always read your column and here's something you might like." And I absolutely adored that kind of a connection through the mailbox. A great many of those people were 80 years old when they were doing this, or in their early 90s. You can imagine that a great many of them have gone on now. And so I don't get those kinds of letters and envelopes anymore. Instead, it comes by email. I got a tremendous amount of response by email. And I get recipes sent to me. If I put a query in the paper, the answers are very likely to come now by email. It's people our age who are getting in touch with me. I have no idea if young people are reading the column at all. I think occasionally I get something that tells me that this is a relatively young person who is not necessarily using his or her phone and going to Smitten Kitchen or one of the other popular sites where you can get recipes. So, but that remains to be seen. I really don't know how much readership I have among anybody 40 and younger, that we'll see. And then every once in a while, some other thing will happen. I remember one of the most wonderful moments was this recipe that somebody asked me for, the Finnish bread nisu. And I got a response from a person in Rockland who said, "Oh yes, well, we always used to go over to the Rauta's house for a sauna, and Mrs. Rauta always had nisu on hand, so we'd sit in the kitchen afterwards and we'd eat the nisu, and they sent me the recipe. I put that in the paper, and about a year later, I got a letter from somebody who said, I've had this recipe in my kitchen for quite a long time, and I think maybe you'd like to have it." And it turns out that this is Helmi Rauta's nisu recipe in her own hand. And this is, I don't know if you can see, but there it was. This is the recipe that her neighbor had sent me, but it was written in her hand. And this is a wonderful kind of an experience, to hold a piece of paper that she had on a table before her at some time. Her hand passed over this page and she wrote down the recipe. It was really a wonderful, highly personal experience to get something done. So you have these wonderful moments. So it seems to be an old Maine tradition, or probably actually an old American tradition, if you're a columnist like this, to turn a pile of recipes into a cookbook. And so back around 2010 or so, I had a conversation with Kathleen Fleury, who was at Downey's. She was the editor there at the time, Maine editor at the time. And we talked about various things. And she said, "What about a cookbook based on your column?" She knew what I was doing at the Bangor Daily News. So I said, "Yeah, you betcha." I had been using Marjorie Standish's Cooking Down East as a guide to what I learned a lot about Maine traditional cooking from Marjorie Standish's Cooking Down East. And Marjorie herself, of course, had published 2 books off of her column in the Maine Sunday Telegram. Not only cooking down east, but also keep cooking the Maine way. And my predecessor at the Bangor Daily News, Brownie Shrump, Mildred Shrump, had a pile of recipes. She wrote that column for about 4 decades. And so she had a massive pile of recipes, and she kind of threw them all together in a couple of volumes. And so it was a natural thing just to put them together in a book. But I wanted something a little different. So I checked in with Kathleen on this. I said, well, can we, instead of having a cookbook that goes from soup to dessert, with a chapter for bread, a chapter for poultry, a chapter for blah, blah, blah. Could we just do it thematically? Because, if people aren't cooking, they like to read cookbooks. And so it seems to me a cookbook should be fun to read. And I thought a thematic one would be a lot more fun than just a pile of recipes. So Kathleen agreed. She thought that was a good idea. So that's what I did. I mean, I have a chapter in Maine home cooking. It's just classic Maine cooking, and then modern Maine cooking, and the desserts of Maine, which if you look at it written, looks like desert of Maine. So, and we have a desert here, or maybe you didn't know that. But if you ever go to LL Bean, instead of going to LL Bean, if you go the other way, you can get to the desert of Maine. There's 6 chapters altogether. One called Well Preserved. And then season by season with all of the recipes for the vegetables and fruits listed in order that they come, starting with good old rhubarb, and parsnips, and then on through to apples and pumpkins and all that, late fall stuff. And then the other thing about the book is, thank goodness that Kathleen thought this was a good idea too, is one of the great things about getting recipes from people is that they would send the recipe, but they'd also say, listen, and make sure you always da, 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 da. They would give me these little bits of advice. Or when I made the recipe, I would say, oh, wow, that's right. I should make sure that people know that this is a good thing to do when they make this. So the book has lots of marginal notes that says, here's how to approach this particular recipe. And Kathleen she's aware that I like talking about the history of something. So she was all about letting me have boxes that I could sprinkle upon the book that gave me an opportunity to talk a little bit about where a recipe like this came from, how it fits into the general story of Maine food. And so I have all of that. The only thing is that the designer forgot that some people would have a hard time reading this. And so some of the advice in the columns requires a magnifying glass for people our age. And also there's the boxes that have some of the history in them are in a very charming pumpkin color with a lighter pumpkin color. And so they're very hard to read unless you have some assistance. Worth reading once you have that assistance, but it's, we'll see how it goes. So I put it all together. I took the recipes that I put in the columns that I thought better ones I like better than many others. So about 100, and I guess I must have picked out 185 of them, and we had to pare that down. It has about 175 recipes in it. And one of the most fun times of my whole life was when the Down East crew came over to my house on the island. We spent a couple of days. We picked out about 12 recipes that I cooked. Jennifer Smith Mayo was the photographer, and she would lurk in the kitchen and take pictures of the various things I was putting together. And then she'd prowl around my house and take pictures of things that she thought would be atmospheric, I guess. Traveled the island, took pictures of various parts of the island. She took pictures of my garden and the cat and the chickens. And and it was a lot of fun. A food stylist came along with that and tweaked things and said, let's push that over here. We took pictures of the shore sometimes. It was a very grand time. 2 days. I've seldom had more fun. It was just, they were a terrific crew to work with. And boy, it was just really a big fun time. I have to say, there were moments when Jennifer took pictures of things that I thought were a mess. And when I saw them in the book, I thought, oh, she didn't take a picture of that, did she? I guess, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I would have cleaned up more if I'd known she was going to do that, but she moved some stuff around. She did. It turned out just fine. I was just sort of embarrassed at, we all have little piles places, right? And if you thought someone was going to take a picture of you, would probably make it disappear. Nonetheless, there it is in the book, captured for all time. So the book sold reasonably well. I was awfully happy with it, but for some reason or another, Down East decided not to take it out of print. And, I gnashed my teeth for a while and complained. And then I gave up. I just thought, okay, I'll just keep doing my columns. I don't need to be a food writer anymore. I'll just go farm and I'll raise vegetables and make myself happy doing that. But then about 3 months ago, I got a call or an email from the young man who is now more or less in charge of publishing at Down East, which no longer owns the Down East imprint. It's like a lot of things has been sold and sold and sold. And he said, I don't know why we took that book out of print. And I thought, you don't know. But they're going to reprint it in paperback and it's going to come out in November. I presume they're aiming for some kind of a Christmas market. So I encourage it. I felt, oh, well, that's kind of nice. I'm glad to see that. And that sort of put me back. And not only that, they're talking about a couple of books in the future, because I wrote back and I said, since Maine Home Cooking came out, I've collected an awful lot more recipes, at a clip of 52 a year, over about 5 years, you can get yourself quite a little pile. And I've got some really lovely ones. And so he said, yeah, let's do another one. So I thought, oh, well. And he said, not only that, how about a book on food preserving and do-it-yourself type stuff? And I said, 2 books, So apparently I'm back in the writing business. The problem is I really love the farming. And I'm hoping I can cram all this writing effort into winter when normally I would clean my house. But I have a very dirty house by 2025. But there will be, I hope, two more books. And all of this, of course, makes me think about Marge and Brownie. And I think I would just like to take a few minutes to talk about these people, because in the bigger picture of American food writing, weekly columnists and the people who just, shovel stuff into newspapers, people who write for magazines and newsletters and all the rest of that. And now, of course, on the web, have to keep producing new stuff all the time. And this is actually something of it goes well back. I remember at one point in my career perusing the pages of the Boston Globe in the 1890s, and sure enough, there's a column. A regular feature of the paper was this chat between a paper editor and the readers. It was the social media of the later 1800s, early 20th century, where queries came in, How can I make custard without it curdling? How do I get ink out of my husband's shirt pocket? And, all kinds of stuff like that. And the answer comes, and other readers would say, well, I've had very good fortune using blah, 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 whatever it is. And so this is a tradition, and it has a history. With Marjorie Standish and Brownie Shrump, the history in Maine runs roughly like this. I'm going to tell you a little bit about both of them because I think they're very interesting people. Marjorie Holbrook Standish was born in 1908 and she died in 1998. She wrote for the Maine Sunday Telegram for 25 years, a weekly column that came in Sundays. And it usually there were not just one recipe like I do, but, two or three. And she was doing this on a typewriter, mind you, she didn't have the speed and convenience of a computer where you could just cut, paste, and fix your things and send them off by email. She had to do it on paper and send it off. And so did Brownie Shrump, Mildred Greely Shrump. She was born in 1903. She died in 2001. She wrote for the Bangor Daily News from 1951 to April 1954, 43 years, which is a staggering number of years in my book. I just can't imagine doing this for 43 years. I'm going to be lucky if I can hold out. We'll see what happens. They both were raised in Maine. They were both raised really on farms or near farms, learning how to cook on wood stoves or coal burning stoves. Marge grew up in Brunswick, and she spent summers with her grandparents who had their farm in New Meadows, which roughly on the site of the site of that farm has been more or less encompassed by the former naval base. Brownie grew up in Reedfield Depot. They were both college-educated women. Marge went to what was called the Farmington State College. It's become the University of Maine in Farmington. And Brownie went to the University of Maine. They both majored in home economics. In the mid-20th century, that was a very respectable kind of occupation for a woman if she wanted a career. If you didn't want to be a secretary or a nurse or a school teacher, majoring in home economics meant you could do professional work. And both of them ended up doing working, for example, for appliance companies or anything that introduced a modern way of cooking. Marge demonstrated for electric stove company to teach women how to make the transition from wood, coal to cooking on gas. She did a lot. She traveled an awful lot around Maine and showed women how to cook on those. Not many men were learning how to cook on electric stoves in the middle of the 20th century. That's why I'm saying women. I don't mean to leave men out of the picture, but it was in fact women who did that. Brownie, on the other hand, worked a little bit for the Bangor Gas Company, again, demonstrating cooking on gas. The interesting thing about Brownie is that she was a super high energy person. She was very involved in 4-H. She traveled around the state meeting with 4-H clubs. She judged various cooking contests. She did anything she could to promote Maine-grown foods. She was always being called upon by the Department of Agriculture in Maine to promote the use of potatoes. And she and her colleagues baked vats of baked beans to take off to the Eastern Exposition in Springfield, where they distributed the beans in little pots. Oddly enough, I own one of those little pots. And I remember the day my family bought 4 of these. And we went and got in our car. It was cold and rainy, and we sat there and ate the beans out of these little pots and steamed up the car windows because they were so warm, and it was a very welcome meal. She did an awful lot at the University of Maine. She was very interested in an organization called Women of the World. They had international dinners. They had, visiting professors from other countries would, and their families would come along. And so they were cooking Dutch meals and, German meals and Middle Eastern meals and all the rest of it, having these suppers. And so she was a very busy woman, professionally judging food contests like the Pillsbury bake-offs, and any kind of contest they had in Maine, she was always called upon to be a judge. Marge seems to have had a lower profile. She was one of the things that I found out about her. I wish someone had written a biography of her. Brownie got a biography, and it's called If Maine Had a Queen, and it's a charming little book all about Brownie. But there's not one quite like that. You have to tease out Marge's biography by reading the head notes and her recipes in the 2 books that she wrote. And I've had some correspondence with people who remembered her, knew her. She was, besides what she was doing for teaching people how to use electric stoves, I'm sure she got called upon to do some judging, just as Brownie did, and probably other kinds of things as well, but it seems not to have ever bubbled up to some kind of major surface. She was very active with the Augusta General Hospital, doing fundraising for that. Her friends remember that she liked getting together with their friends. She and her husband liked getting together and having people over for dinner. She was a frequent visitor to Blaine House. The cook there knew her quite well. So I'm not quite sure. It was some kind of political action there that nobody seems to have talked about much. She liked to play golf. And I think that probably she and her husband had a typical 20th century companionate marriage. They had friends that they retired to Florida, though she came back to Maine. When she died, she was living in Maine, but they did have some time in Florida. So she had a lower profile. She didn't write as long as Brownie did either. And I have a sense of Marge, that she was a calmer person, that she was probably very well organized. Her books are interesting because the head notes are much more complete, and she'll talk about where she got the recipe and the associations of things with that recipe as she was writing them down. So the books are more fun to read because of Marge's voice in that. Brownie, on the other hand, she was wildly sociable. She loved cars. She always had a red one. People say that you could barely see Brownie. She was tiny. She'd be behind the driver's wheel like this. You could see the top of her head through the windshield. And so she just raced around the state like mad. She was just going here, going there, high energy all the time, always something, cooking. I get the sense of Brownie that she was a real whirlwind. When she put together a cookbook, she just picked up a handful of recipes and threw it in a book. That was it. No head notes. She would list sometimes who she got the recipe from, but there was no explanation. It was just, here you go, kids, poof, have a couple hundred recipes. It's just, and somebody who knew her said, oh yeah, Brownie, they always had people over and potlucks and things like that, birthday parties and all in their side yard, because Brownie wasn't much of a housekeeper, So one gets the impression that she was very busy in the community, but she sure wasn't home vacuuming and scrubbing, So I kind of admire all that energy. But I would have liked to have heard more from her, and her recipes. I would like to have heard more Brownie. It was like Brownie never met a recipe she didn't like, and there were lots and lots of recipes that were not the least bit from scratch. It was open this and open that and mix these together. And, that was Brownie's style, but she sure persisted. I mean, God bless her for 43 years. I mean, really. Well, I'm a little bit like both of them. One of the things I have noticed in some of their writing is the same sense of desperation from time to time, needing a recipe. Brownie's columns certainly looked that way to me. I mean, her absolutely eclectic taste in anything that she could get down on paper points to that. Oh no, I probably have a meeting and I know I have to go here. I have to have that. And those people are coming over here. What am I going to put in the paper? Oh, here's one. That's just an impression I get. I didn't know her, so I don't know if that was really like, that was her method of writing, but it doesn't look as well constructed to me as a lot of Marge's stuff. And there are moments, certainly, when my column Taste Buds in the Bangor Daily News are not particularly well constructed either. Because on Saturday night, I say, oh, what am I going to do for the paper this week? So I try not to be, completely a basket case about what recipes. I always have a list of things I'd like to try. But there have been times, hustle, get something in the paper this week. I'm glad I only have to write one thing, I'm really lucky. I do have to take a picture of it. And that for me is the most fraught part of my week, is trying to get a good picture of whatever it is that's supposed to go in the paper. I don't know how much, much of a weekly columnist I'll be. We'll certainly get some more of the recipes I've collected over the years, certainly get them between covers of a couple of books. And then I think I'll just stop doing all of this, go out and weed things, because that's where my bliss is, out in the garden, picking bugs off plants and pulling weeds and fretting over whether this row has been thinned enough. That's what I really love to do. But I also love hearing from my readers. It's wonderful to open my Yandro. This is Yandro. He's a very lovely cat, and he thinks he should be fed because we've moved the clock ahead. Oh, jeepers. Yandro, he just knocked over my water. Anyway, I don't remember where I was, but I'm probably ready to take questions, if there are any.
Great. And if people would like to use the raise hand feature, we'll moderate questions and get to everybody in turn. And Catherine, you had your hand up first, I believe.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you so much. It was just so interesting. And I'm relating because I was one of those home economists who showed people how to use an electric range. And that was a different part of my life. And so I know all about all the jobs that home economists could do. And when I was a home economist, my supervisor always was very cautious about recipes that people sent in for these church cookbooks, because she was concerned about the accuracy of the measurements and the quantities. And she wouldn't let us use any of those because unless they had been tested. So I guess my question is, do you test all the recipes, or did you, or have you ever had a situation where a recipe appeared and they were off in their measurements that really affected the dish? That's my question, basically.
Yeah, I do. I try every one.
Mm,
Yeah, you bet.
mm.
And then things have gone in the paper that have been wrong, and the mistakes were almost always mine.
Interesting, yeah.
I'll forget to do something like, add the baking powder, or I'll list the baking powder, but forget to write it in the directions or some awful thing like that. And I get to pay for it by spending the next 2 days responding to people's queries. Like, oh my God, what am I supposed to do? It's just awful. It doesn't happen very often. And part of the reason that it happens as much as it does is because newspapers and magazines both no longer have copy editors. Or if they do, they don't have anybody who knows how to cook. So they wouldn't notice a mistake,
Right. Yeah.
So I don't always have an editor that has my back. It's a little nerve-wracking from time to time.
Katie?
How would you, thank you very, very much, first of all, Sandy. How would you pass on recipes to the next generation? Do you have any tips on how best to do that? Or do you just wait until the next generation, you just die and then hope that
the best way so far, get them in your kitchen. Get them in the kitchen with you. I have a cluster of young friends here on Islesboro who come over. They'll say, Sandy, when you're gonna can tomatoes, can I come over? I also have had, in order to get some help for growing as much as I do, I have turned to worldwide opportunities in organic farming, which recruits people to volunteer at various organic operations around the country. And over the past 7 years or so, I've had quite a little parade through my kitchen. And some of them have come not only to learn about how to do various gardening operations, but they're here because they also want to know about cooking, or they get here and they realize they can learn something about cooking and they get excited. So we'll have times in the kitchen where they're watching me do stuff, and they'll say, and I'll give them an opportunity to try to make something, and we'll work together. So for me, the best way has proved to be a face-to-face. I've been debating about whether to start a website or not. For example, I'm mulling over having a Substack. This is a service that allows a person to do newsletters online, and I've thought about it. It's used a lot by young people, and so I've thought about that. I haven't quite figured out if I want to add one more writing chore to my life right now, but I think something online. I've seen them come in the kitchen. Some of them come in with kitchens, and they put their phone on the table, and where older generation has cookbooks with flour on the pages and all, they have phones with flour all over the front, because they've got it right on the table with them. So I think electronic communication is going to work well. A podcast would work well to reach the younger ones, or in person, I think.
Thank you.
However, I do have to add, Sandy, my most treasured possession from my mother, who has passed away, is her cookbook, because it has her handwriting in it, because she wrote all over it. It's the only thing I have that actually has her handwriting in it. And I throw everything away when I move. It's the only thing I've kept. So cookbooks are a huge thing that I think, and a lot of my friends, like, that's the only thing that they have from like their grandparents and stuff. So it's something that we really, really like to have, because you have that handwriting in it, because everybody writes in their cookbooks as they're cooking. But
yeah, that's true. I have my mother-in-law's collection of recipes, I have my grandmother's and my mother's. And I'm just going to pass it along. I don't know if my niece will ever enjoy cooking the way I do, or but she might be glad to have the handwriting, you know, she might be glad to be able to look at it all. Yeah.
Well, I'm the transition generation in that I have my own 4x6 card file that I used early in our marriage, and now I'm all digital. I use the Paprika app. And what's the next generation? You can't. It's hard to pass an app over, and it certainly doesn't have your fingerprints all over it. I just think that all those recipes are going to be lost. Gloomy.
It's a real concern. Of course, you know, I don't mean to be, you know, apocalyptic, but what happens if the grid goes down? What if the web falls apart? What if somebody hacks stuff and you lose your recipe collection? I love paper. You know, I still make handwritten lists, and, you know, I know people were just all the time, but I don't trust them very much. I know you're not supposed to say things like that, but I don't.
Till?
Well, you probably don't, maybe you know, the kind of influence you must have had on so many families in the area through the newspaper with, you know, how many kids grew up on your recipes that were printed there. I know in my own case, my sister is online here. We were influenced not by a local newspaper, but things like the Ladies' Home Journal, where my mother, you know, got recipes from, and still have in her own handwriting, you know, a recipe indicating from the Ladies' Home Journal. So you're probably mother to a lot of Maine families, given your work on the newspaper.
Well, but that's a really beguiling thought. I mean, I really hadn't thought about that. What's interesting to me is that I know, in fact, that Marjorie Standish did, because sometimes when I've asked people to send their family's recipe for, or someone would send me a recipe and they say, this has been my family for years, you know, my grandmother always made this. Well, if I read the recipe, if I look at Marge Standish, sometimes it's word for word from Marge. And so the recipe has migrated from Marge to the family history, the family tradition. This is the way we always made whatever it was. So that's an astonishing thing. I guess if you've done it for 17 years, you could get a kid raised up, you know, during that time.
I have one other question. If you were in the state legislature of Maine and had to nominate not the lobster, I'm going to rule the lobster out, but to nominate a Maine-grown food as the food of Maine, what would be, or if you were abroad and somebody said, what is significant about Maine food or cooking? What would you, a similar question, what would you say?
You know, I really love beans. And having married a Mainer who liked what he called big beans. In other words, he liked the big ones that you see sometimes here in Maine, where the big ones like a soldier bean, or some of the things that are vended by state of Maine. There's a lot of these wonderful big beans, the kidney bean size beans, and you can still get some, and there's people still growing them and keeping a lot of these old varieties going. I guess I would nominate, you know, a tiger's eye or one of these other big beans. We don't, you know, if you're in Boston, you're very likely to have baked beans made with navy beans. I grew up on navy beans. So I guess I would have to say a bean, a traditional heirloom bean grown here in Maine.
Thank you.
Nina? You're still muted, I think.
Sandy, I love your cat. He's such a ham.
He's such a pain in the neck.
Literally. Literally.
He's a wonderful cat. He really is. And I love him dearly. But about this time of the day, he starts lobbying for his evening meal, so.
I got a dog like that, especially with daylight saving time. It's going to get really,
It's gonna
really
drive me
amazing.
crazy.
I was just going to say I was thinking when you were talking about Marge and what was the other woman's first name?
Brownie Shrump.
Brownie and Marge. It seems like writing recipes gave them a very long life, didn't it? I mean, they were ancient when they died, right?
Yeah, they were.
Yeah. And what we were saying too, Katie, about handwriting and recipes. I have recipes from my mother in German, because I was born in Germany, and recipes from Jim's mother. And I just love looking at them in that typical handwriting that I cherish. And I never used to keep letters. You know, I just didn't. When everybody was writing paper letters, I didn't keep them. But I kept my mother's recipes. And it's a real memory thing, looking at her handwriting. It's very precious. Thanks, Sandy.
Yeah, not only that, you know, in my grandmother's recipes, not only does she have the recipes written down, but she also wrote down the menus that she used to write for menus for her bridge club, for example. And when I read those recipes, when I read those menus, I think to myself that this was my grandmother being aspiring to something that she really had to work hard at. My granddad was a little on the, not, you know, he wasn't always as the support of the family. And so she had to work and not cook and not have the bridge club over. But I can see that she aspired to all kinds of things when I read these menus and the recipes that accompany them. And so I'm picking up a social history of my grandmother that I would never have had. I didn't ask those questions when I was young and she was still alive. I didn't ask her, well, Granny, you know, when you were 45, what did you care most about? Well, I can see in her recipe book what she was hoping for in her life, what the trajectory, what she hoped for to be a trajectory in her life. And the other problem with, you know, one of the things about the recipes, both that Brownie wrote down and that Marge had in some of her books, is what I'm going to call the extinct recipes of the 20th century, because they depended on products which are no longer being made or which have been reformulated so that the recipes no longer work. For the first time in history, you know, we have recipes that can never be recreated because they depend on ingredients that just simply no longer exist. So if you have a recipe for a dish made with beef and potatoes and carrots and celery, although our beef is different than it used to be, you can at least get beef. These are compromised recipes from the 20th century, and of course now also the 21st century. And so my mother's recipes is, you know, she was a great one for cooking out of the box. You know, ethnic cooking at our house was Chef Boyardee.
Mike?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. First, I want to thank you, Sandy. That was really insightful here in terms of what's going on in Maine. That the initial question I had was already answered in terms of what typifies Maine cooking other than lobster.
And blueberries.
And blueberries, yes, especially those small, little tiny blueberries, ground blueberries, not the bush. The other thing is that when I heard about this, I looked through my cookbook collection here, and I have a book called New Maine Cooking, and it is by Jean Pollard. And I thought that was this is what it was going to be about, but I guess that's not the case. Yeah, anybody? Are we still there? Hello?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, all right. I'm flashing on and off here. And that was a book in 1987 that I had bought, and the reason I bought it was it introduced me to an item called labna, which is the precursor to Greek yogurt that was first made. This woman first made it in this Maine cooking book, and I have never seen it before then. Anyway, there's one copy of it left that I can find on Amazon, and it's in Dallas, Texas. And it's so it really gets around apparently. And all right. And anyway, regarding your new books, Jean, I really do hope you include a very messy kitchen in your picture. I think that really lends a lot of credibility to your recipes. And I'm so tired of these antiseptic pictures you see in books now that which really are chemistry experiments. Everything's all cut up, and they've got little dishes and all that. And, it's not that insightful. One question about your books, though, and your coming ones and your past ones. Your food photography. Who does that for you? Do you do your own?
I try really hard not to do my own. When I wrote Saltwater Foodways, actually, my former husband, Jamie McMillan, took the pictures, and he did a fabulous job.
Okay.
The pictures are perfectly gorgeous. I did all my own food styling, and it seemed fine. From Maine Home Cooking, down east, assigned Jennifer Smith to the job, and she did a fabulous job too. She was, lots of times photographers are kind of, in your face, but she was absolutely invisible in the kitchen. I had, she took all these pictures and I never knew it. She was really wonderful. In the weekly column for the paper, it's all my own photography. I look at examples of, whenever I look at food photography, I look at this, say, okay, let's see, what do I like about that picture? And I try to identify things so that I can repeat them, but I'm not a natural born food photographer.
Right.
It goes in the paper anyway.
Yeah, apparently it's quite an art anyway. There's certain people who just do that solely for a living. And
Yeah.
well, I want to thank you for answering my questions. I don't want to take up all the airtime here, and
It's fine.
but thank you very much. It's been wonderful.
Well, thank you I'm glad you attended. I have to say, I really hate writing recipes. I mean, this is really, there's some sort of karma at work here with driven me to do this. I don't follow recipes very well. I'm always tinkering with things. It's been the most exhausting kind of discipline to take a recipe as it's written to me for the purposes of paper, and then following it well enough to know how it really ought to come out without messing around with it too much. If I make it the second time around, then I mess with it and I report on how I messed with it. But I'm an imprecise cook. I open a refrigerator and dump stuff out and say, all right, what am I going to make out of this? And I just, or I go down cellar and I say, okay, we got some sprouted potatoes over here. What's it going to be? I really can't tell you how much I don't like writing recipes, but there we are.
Could I just add something here? That I use, and I agree with you in terms of the recipe element. I have several hundred cookbooks, and I have a cataloging system which is online, which is called Eat Your Books, appropriately, and it does catalog all your cookbooks so that you don't have to. It's just like a card catalog of your own books.
Yeah.
But it doesn't list your recipes. It only lists ingredients. And I was getting to the point where I'm so lazy, I don't even go look up the recipe. So once I know the ingredients, I agree with you, is at that point, I'll just like wing it. Okay, I know sort of like that's how it's going to work. And then make the recipe and then go back to the recipe and find out what I did that was different from the original recipe.
Yeah.
And of course, mine always trumps, but
Sure.
but I thought that system is really helpful if anybody does that or was thinking of venturing out to the no recipe land.
Yeah.
And Sam Sifton in the New York
Yes.
Times also
Yes.
has a no recipe
No recipe.
column.
Yeah,
Which is
yeah,
interesting.
Yeah.
Again, I'm sorry, I don't want to take up any of your time here.
No, but I love Sam Sifton's no recipe recipes. That's where I try to get away with that. Every once in a while, I'll sneak one by my editor, who's probably, I've had a whole series of editors at the Bangor Daily News, and every once in a while they'll say, no, you got to give them a real recipe. And I'm thinking, here we go again, because what I really treasure in a recipe is tinkerability. I've literally have had people tell me that they couldn't make a recipe because they were lacking a quarter of a teaspoon of a certain spice. Or, I remember the person who said, my grandson is allergic to nuts. What kind of cookies can I make? Think, well, the ones that don't have nuts in them, or, if you,
Right.
I just don't know how to answer a question like that. It's just,
Yeah.
and so in the course of writing about the recipe, I'll say, if you don't like garlic, don't put it in. If you like capsicum heat, add red pepper, just anything I can to kind of loosen up people's thinking
Right.
about a recipe.
It goes back to the chemistry concept again I mentioned earlier.
Yeah,
People think
yeah.
that cooking is chemistry.
Yeah,
And it won't work unless I have this little tincture
Yeah,
of
I
something like
know.
that, right?
yeah. If I can give those people aid and comfort, I do. I mean,
Donald?
Yeah, this has been such a great thing, Sandy, you've done. We have a cherished book that we use. This is
Oh,
my
yes.
grandmother's Fanny Farmer,
yes.
well used, and with all the notes. And if my wife and I ever get separated for some reason, this is what we'll fight over. And it includes all the notes for a dinner party that
Yeah.
she gave. The funny thing about this is that my grandmother never baked a pie until she was 65.
How'd she get away
had
with
a
that?
maid, she had a maid and a cook for many years, but during the Depression, her husband left her and with 3 kids, and she had to make her way. She got a master's degree in education from Yale after that, and became the first female principal of an urban high school in Connecticut. Toured the world, had fantastic life. But her cooking, she had certain things she did well. And one of the ones that is the family heritage is a handwritten recipe we have about bourbon pumpkin pie, which is never, every Thanksgiving. And you talked about digital recipes, that's now been photographed and digitalized and shipped throughout the family. And then when we gather as a family, somebody's assigned to make this pie. And God forbid you ever try to make this pie and not make it appropriately, because people have been known to do this.
No.
And been banned from ever making it again.
Yeah.
But they have redeemed themselves by making changes to it that have
Yeah.
actually improved it.
Oh, good.
And that's the chemistry that Mike brought up. I thought Mike's comments were great because that's how I like to cook. I don't think there should ever be a recipe for lasagna. You should be able to look in your refrigerator and not have anything that an Italian would know as lasagna, and you should still be able to make some delicious meal.
Yeah, that's right.
The chemistry of it.
I hate to think how much food's wasted in this country because people are following recipes. If you, supposing you have a recipe that calls for a half a cup of chopped red pepper, so you fill your cup up to the half part and you have a little bit of pepper left over. What do you do with it? Well, if you follow recipes, you're going to put it back in your fridge or it's going to molder away.
Yeah.
So when I'm writing recipes, I always say to people, round up or down to the nearest whole vegetable. Don't.
Right.
Most of the time, it isn't going to make an awful lot of difference. And in any event, I mean, when you think about a small, medium, and a large onion, well, small,
that?
medium, and large changes annually at this place. So some years my large onions are like this, instead of like this. And so it goes, so I think we're very, we really have a lot of respect for science in our culture, or at least we have until very recently. And so, we feel like we can trust science. And so if the recipe is accurately written, we trust that it will work. And if we make it the same way every time, that's very comforting to us. And I think that's great if you're running a restaurant. But I think for an awful lot of just, plain home cooking, who needs it? Cakes, cake baking and things like that, that's a different ballgame. But if you're making a soup or if you're throwing together a stir fry for dinner, who needs it,
I leave baking to the expert here.
Yes.
Yeah,
He's just begging for a pie.
Yeah.
Oh, is that what he's, all right. We got your number, fella.
Thank you so
Like your cat. I love your cat. Been tapping on your shoulder. That's
Yes.
Yeah, it's something
wonderful.
about the daylight savings, because we were just Zooming with our daughter in Minnesota, and her dog was knocking at the thing, wanting to go for a walk.
Yeah.
And
They don't know.
the animals know more than we do. Thank
Right.
you so much, Sandy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming.
Katie?
How many people remember Alton Brown and his story, Good Eats, his TV program? He was a scientific chemist.
Oh, yeah.
I have here something our son sent us, an article, a letter that Alton Brown wrote to people in general. I'd like to just read one paragraph. His grandmother died. And so the first thing I did when I got to her house was greedily seize the small wooden recipe box that had sat on my counter my entire life. Upon inspection, this ancient codex proved disappointing. There were gobs of recipes written in her smooth hand, but they were all the stuff of gossip, Mary Sue's marshmallow salad, Gertrude's oatmeal divinity, etc. The real treasures were nowhere to be found, and that made sense. She knew those recipes and had no reason to write them down. It had been my duty to learn them from her, and I hadn't taken the time. In her last years, I'd been too busy to visit much, too preoccupied with peeling away the mysteries of egg proteins and figuring out why toast burns. In short, I'd missed the whole stinking point. When I left her house after the funeral, I took Ma's favorite cooking tool, her grandmother's cast iron skillet. I understand this vessel, the particulars of its metallurgy, how heat moves through its crystalline matrix, but I'll never be able to coax the old magic from it, and for that, I'm very sorry.
Oh, that is really touching. Yeah, it's very easy for us to lose the important thing. Yeah. Yes.
On another line, Corey, Till's sister, has made a cookbook. She's translated the recipes from her German predecessors and made it available. It gone to the great. It's this thick. It's a wonderful symposium. So that's another way of being sure that the next generation, at least you've got it on the platter. You have no excuse not to make it now. So.
If I could butt in, I don't have the chat feed hand, so I can't do that. The app that I used for that cookbook is called Create My Cookbook, all written together. And it's fantastic. You put in your own recipes, you could put in your own photos. It has all kinds of, help. The people who run the app are extremely helpful and responsive, and you can put together a very nice book. And I did that for my girls with German and or traditional family recipes wherever they came from, basically for Christmas cooking. But you might take a look at that if you want to pass your recipes on, because it really works.
What was it again, Corey?
Create My Cookbook,
Create My Cookbook. Thanks.
all written together.com.
That's so good to know about. I'm going to write that down too. I really hope people will do that. I have a number of book cookbooks, just pages of recipes that people have put together to give their families so that they'll have a selection of mom's or grandma's recipes. And I'm always so glad when people do that. It's really important. Of course, I remember one time somebody told me about a recipe for a chocolate pie, chocolate cake the family really loved. And the grandma wrote down the recipe, all right, and it said flour, sugar, chocolate, butter, and didn't write down the quantities. It was just a list of ingredients to remind the person what they were supposed to put in it. And had anybody spent some time watching her assemble the cake, then they would have an idea. Or sometimes they did watch it, but they weren't really paying the kind of attention that we're going to need to in order to recreate the recipe in the future. So that's, you can miss the boat any number of ways.
And then Chad,
Yes, I'd like to sort of advocate the opposite from what Sandy's saying, and to use the recipe. I'm trying to lower my hand here.
oh, I'll do it for you.
To use the recipe, at least it's the first time. Follow
Yes,
it
always the
exactly.
first
If you're not going to follow the recipe exactly on the first time, you've picked the wrong author. So try that, even if there is a sliver of onion left over. And from there on, to doctor it as you see fit. I don't use, teaspoon, tablespoon, all that. Mine's a pinch and a handful and so on. So my recommendation is, yeah, really do follow it the first time. Even if it says, what do you call it? A half a teaspoon of red pepper.
Yeah.
Because you're seeing what this person actually has to offer you. They've created this, they've made it. And food is very culturally significant, very familial, meaning from the family. And this is a true other world for you to experience.
I always do it right. I always do it the first time. And then after that, all bets are off. I gotta say one thing about accuracy though. I get really out of patience with when I see a printed cookbook or a printed recipe for whether it's online or in print. It says, bake the cookies for 13 to 17 minutes. I think, in what world is my oven going to match that person's oven? Will I take these out at 13 minutes? Will I take them out at 17 minutes? Will I take them out at, 18? God help us, or maybe 15? Ovens vary tremendously. People's cooktops vary tremendously. If you're having really damp weather, your flour and your sugar are going to behave differently than they will when it's very dry out. How fresh are your herbs? Will 1/2 teaspoon of the oregano work? Or if you have very old spices, it's going to taste different. I just think that absolute accuracy of the scientific sort is a little illusory. Is that the right pronunciation? I think it's something worth aspiring to, perhaps, but I don't think you can bet on it. I had an editor one time always wanted me to say how many servings it would make. And I used to think, this is going to be good for 2 people in a household if one's a mother and the other's a 13-year-old kid. On the other hand, the recipe is probably going to be good for 4 to 6 people over 65. So, how do you, so 1 9-inch cake, I can imagine a household where two people would wipe that out in one meal. I mean, you have to give somebody a measure, of course, but every time I write down, serves 4 to 6, I always think to myself, well, all right, but maybe not.
There's one area where some people, and I'm heading in that myself, where exactitude and precision are really important, and that is in the making of coffee.
Oh, yeah.
Want a consistent cup of coffee, it's often the case that the temperature of the water, the weight of the bean, how quickly you pour, all those things make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's just beginning to tell you all about it.
Yeah.
I have one closing, Sandy. If you're thinking of doing something on the internet, I would suggest a blog versus a website. That you could do the blog yourself. Well, a website, you have to pay somebody to program it and make it, and blog is much easier to do. The downside of that is that you have to keep up with it, or else you lose readers really quickly. So if you're not doing it every week, people just start looking otherwhere. And the other thing is that to keep that flour off of your phone, get a magnet and stick it on your refrigerator.
Well, that's not a problem. I don't use flour. I don't use my phone. I write down recipes. Believe it or not, I'll look a recipe up on the phone, but then I write it down. I take the paper to the kitchen.
I have to defend digital phones and stuff. It is handy when you're in the grocery store and you can't remember the ingredient for something you want to make that night. Whip out the phone and say, "Oh, the asparagus, I forgot that," or whatever.
Yeah,
Good use of a phone.
Right.
Yeah.
It's also handy when the shopping list you get doesn't make any sense to you, and you call home and you say, "What does this mean?"
What are you talking about?
We've been talking about quantities in recipes, but I find a very valuable element is substitutions in recipes, where so many other things are possible. Instead of a white onion, it could be a leek, it could be a red onion, it could be any kind of an onion, any kind of allium, actually.
Yeah.
And I think I follow Mark Bittman. I don't know about Mark. That's another New York Times guy. He's very good in his recipes about substituting, giving a lot of substitutions for possibilities, without necessarily violating the flavor profile of the dish. So.
Yeah.
But substitutions are really important. And also, Sandy, if you're going to write a book, try to include your gardening into this, and especially if you're going to do something with preserving, that would be really excellent from dirt to jar, that would be a nice
Good
insight.
thinking.
Yeah.
Good thinking. Yeah. I'd love to know what kinds of, do any of you look up recipes for different kinds of preserves? And if you do, what are you looking for?
Well, fermentation seems to be a big item now, and I'm looking for what I've been trying to do more of is kimchi, Korean kimchi, which is a lot of cabbages, any kind of a cabbage. And there are many, many variations in being able to do that. So that's one item I've certainly been looking up. And certainly my pickles never come out to be quite as good as something I can get from the supermarket. And I'm not quite sure why that is. So, even though pickling seems to be a pretty easy event, but I pretty much managed to screw it up.
What do you think goes wrong?
So was that?
What do you think goes wrong?
I think it's either the salting or the vinegar. I'm just not getting this right in terms of the combinations of the ingredients, and either that or not adding and just being. Everybody's so sugar phobic these days, and that some pickling really just need to have sugar in it because that makes the process work, and so. I'm a little bit flummoxed about a lot of the pickling I've tried to do so far.
Katie and I have been wrestling, I don't know, Katie, years maybe, and trying to figure out to make the perfect English omelet. It turns out to be extremely difficult to get a crumpet at home that has all the proper holes in it, because they tend to be nice, often maybe soggy cakes that are kind of chewy and not very tasty, but they don't have all the proper holes. It's been very difficult to work out both the ingredients and the processing, get this crumpet right. I think we finally have found one, looking online, that Katie made the other day, that is very, very promising.
Interesting. Huh. Is there a difference between the flours that they might have in England and our flour?
It's a long story.
Case, and then there are differences in terms of do you use baking soda or baking powder? Do you use a combination of the two? How much yeast? How long do you let it rise? The temperature of the griddle, the variables are enormous.
Interesting. Yeah.
Well, I think we're probably just about through. Sandy, thank you so much. It was just a pleasure. And it really was. It was marvelous. And I have the good fortune of being able to see you in Maine.
Yes.
Yes. So that will be.
Hi, Jim. Hi, Jim. I see Jim sneaking up in back of you.
Yeah, there he is.
Congratulations on a successful afternoon.
Oh, it was wonderful fun. It really
Thank
was.
you. You've all been so much fun to talk with. I really enjoyed this.
And you.
And
Anyway.
everyone will get a follow-up email with the key lime pie recipe from Nina. So look for that after later this afternoon.
Sandy liked that one a lot.
I did.
And
It's wicked easy. It really is. And may you all enjoy it.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks so much. And we'll have another one of these in April.
Mhm.
And my
Another
friend,
Mainer.
another Mainer,
Yes.
Nancy Harmon Jenkins.
Who put us in touch with each other. I mean,
She did.
Nancy was what we have in common.
That's right.
Yeah.
Nancy and I went to college together. We graduated in the same class. So anyway, all these wonderful incestuous relationships.
Nancy
Okay.
was here for a little while. She left a little bit ago.
Yeah, that's right. Mindy, will you close the meeting or what?
Yep, I'm gonna close it. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Sandy.
you all.
Bye-bye.
Lovely to see you all.